Hi, Amy. Tommy here. Thanks for your work in week two. Good stuff in both response forums. I thought I'd send you a quick video reply here on what you're kind of digging into in the second response forum, the relation between particularity and universality, and maybe how to distinguish or make sense of Paul's teaching in relation to that distinction, maybe some wider implications for scripture. So, just a few thoughts on that. Um, I think the first thing I want to say is that Paul is always speaking from a particular place. And as a Jewish person, he's speaking from a particular place that has a certain kind of implications for other people and even for all people. And that's because he is a witness to the revelation of the God who is the creator of the world and therefore the creator of all. So I think you're sort of tracking well. I think, follow this parallel with King, that Paul is writing from a particular place for a particular audience does not mean that what he's saying does not have the farthest reaching ramifications. This is even explicit, actually, in a section that's coming up for next week. And it's where he gives this long quotation or sort of selection of quotations from the law, the prophets, from the Psalter, the writings, and he gets to the end and he says, now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, right? So there's the law coming from a particular place to people under the law. But then he goes on to say, so that every mouth may be shut and all the world be liable to God. In other words, to be for Paul a bearer of God's law is to be a witness to the rest of the world. So I think that is key for getting at that particularity versus universality. Now, I think this is a larger hermeneutical question that you're asking, and it's a really important one. I don't think that should lead us to infer that what Paul is saying strikes every person, every community, every context in exactly the same way. It's crucial in my mind to remember that this letter has an audience, that Paul is speaking to particular concerns of this audience. So that the way that this letter or Paul's teaching, or frankly, anything in scripture, the way that it speaks more broadly, the way that it addresses the entire world, let's say, to me is always going to be contingent on how it has passed through its audience, how it has come from a particular place. So this would be easily illustrated, I guess, by appealing to the diversity of Paul's teaching in the range of letters that we have in the New Testament. Um, he's making claims about who God is in all of them, dealing with what we might think of as general terms, sin, injustice, idolatry, all of these sorts of things. And yet he doesn't say the same thing in all of the letters. He articulates his gospel with all kinds of distinctiveness in each letter in virtue of the needs that that letter is addressing. So that strikes me as important for us when we think about Romans as part of scripture, that Paul is making claims on all kinds of people beyond his immediate audience, making claims that have ramifications, arguably, for the whole world, insofar as this letter is a witness to the one true God. And yet, the way that it touches us, the way that it maybe invites us to be teachers of it or witnesses with it to others, I think if it's going to be truthful, has to be shaped by the particular ways that this letter um, sort of conveys its teaching. What concerns are the occasion of its teaching? And then that means that we're going to be making judgments in our interpretation of how the letter is addressing its audience and how to see ourselves as an extension of that audience by analogy, and how to see others besides ourselves in communities maybe even distinct from ours as somehow also touched as an extended part of this audience, but always wrestling with the particulars of how this letter works. So that's kind of how I would encourage us to think about the relation between um, particularity and universality. When it comes to the universal claims of God's revelation, I would say they are never immediate. They're always mediated. And that's because of who God is as a God who speaks particularly to people. And then when God speaks to other people, it's always through how God has been revealed, as opposed to just speaking something or revealing something that hangs generally over everybody in the same way. That I think doesn't really resonate with the sort of testimony about God that we get in Romans and the rest of the Bible. Hope that's helpful to you. Feel free to reply if you want to keep this conversation going. Thanks for some thoughtful responses in week 2.